This is Bump, Baby and Beyond with Emma's Diary.
This podcast is in association with Colief Infant Drops, who have been trusted by mums for more than 20 years. Hi everyone, it's Hollie from Pretty Big Butterflies and Hollie Plus, and you're listening to Bump, Baby and Beyond with Emma's Diary. Today I'm joined by the lovely Georgina, who is a mummy to 2, and today we're going to share our tips and advice for coping with colic. It's so common, but as a new mum, it can be really scary. So hopefully you'll find our tips useful. So welcome, Georgina. It's great to have you on the show today.
Hi, Hollie. Thank you very much for having me.
Now, with regards to colic, according to the NHS, colic is when a baby cries a lot, but there's no obvious cause, which can obviously be quite daunting for new parents.
Yeah.
And it's not known exactly what causes some babies to get colic, but it may be because babies find it harder to digest food when they're young. So that's what the NHS say colic is.
Mm-hmm.
So with your 2 little ones, did they suffer from colic? How was that with you when they were very tiny?
Yeah, so they both actually had colic. So I've got a 4-year-old little boy and a 3-year-old little girl. They've got a 16-month age gap, so it was very back to back. So I remember it well. And they both had it in very different ways. So my 4-year-old little boy, who's my first, he didn't have like the stereotypical colic of like crying in the evening for a big extended period of time, but he was colicky, if that makes sense. So after every feed, he would seem very uncomfortable, like lots of drawing his knees up, crying, just very hard to settle after a feed. Whilst my daughter was the opposite, and she was the very textbook typical, come 6 o'clock in the evening, she was going to cry for a solid 3 hours, and there was nothing you could do about it really. It was very hard to settle her. So they both had it for very different reasons.
Okay, so it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because before I was pregnant, well, actually, to be fair, before I became a mum, I didn't really know anything about colic. It was like this new word, and I was like, I didn't even know kind of what it meant. And then, you know, when your baby starts crying and, you know, when they're so little, you start researching everything, don't you? And it's then you start looking at those kind of symptoms, don't you, like you said, with the raising your knees up and the crying for kind of the 3 hours onwards over 3 days and things like that. So how did you know that your babies had colic?
So with Rory, it was harder to say because he just seemed really uncomfortable after all of his bottles, but in the evening sometimes, like come bedtime, he would have an extended cry. But I would never really said that he had like colic until when I had Ellen and she had the very textbook colic. I was like, oh, that's colic. Also, Rory, I always thought you were just kind of colicky, like you just didn't seem like a very happy baby for a little while. Whilst with Ellen, she started from about 3, I was trying to remember it the other day and I was like looking at dates. I think it was from about 3 weeks. She started crying, not in the evening, but like witching hour, so about 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, she'd have like a really big cry for a couple of days, and we thought, oh, that's odd. And then it seemed to go like 20 minutes later, and then all of a sudden at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, she would have a big extended cry for 3 hours, and it lasted for a couple of weeks. So I could kind of guess from reading the NHS website and things like that that was what colic was.
Yeah, and it's hard, isn't it? Because I always, when my little ones were babies, I remember having this kind of tick box exercise that I did. So if they were crying, I'd remember going, right, okay, do they need a nappy change? Are they hungry? Are they too hot? Are they too cold? I had a list and I was like, one of these will make this one of these is what they want. One of these will stop them from crying. And when I realised that my youngest one had colic, it was when I was doing all those things on my list and none of them was soothing him. So, you know, I didn't really know about the whole lifting their knees up or arching their back. I just thought that was while baby's crying, those are the kind of things they do because, you know, I've never been a mum before.
Yeah.
You know, it's all, what is this? This is a baby. I don't know how it works. And it was only kind of when all those options weren't working for me, I was like, right, I feel like this is, he can't just be an unhappy baby. It says, I remember going, it says online that one of these things should work and it's not. So there's something wrong.
Yeah.
And I guess it's like almost a mother's instinct, isn't it? To kind of be like, well, there's something not quite right here. Because I actually spoke to, I think it was my health visitor, or we had like a walk-in, you know, you can go to the walk-in centres and speak to a health visitor.
Yes. Yeah.
And I went and spoke to someone, because I just couldn't understand why all of a sudden he had been crying for kind of, and again, the same as you, it was in the evening. It was, for us, it was more around the kind of the 3 o'clock, between 3 and 6.
Okay.
And I just couldn't understand. I couldn't understand why he was still crying. So I actually went to see a health visitor, and she suggested that he could have colic. And that's when I kind of read up on it, because I'd never heard of it before. I had no idea what it was.
Because I had Rory before, I think I was kind of quite well read. So I knew with Ellen that it was like I just had a bit more of a background of what colic could be. But I remember my husband, who isn't as well read as like me, he didn't research things in the way that mums do. He was like, well, what's wrong with her? He just couldn't fathom why, like you say, like he's gone through the tick boxes and he'd never heard of colic, didn't know what it was, and he was just mind blown about, you know, I think he's still quite traumatized to today because he doesn't ever want to talk about it. So I think he was really shocked about colic and how relentless it is, because like you say, like they cry for so long, you think you've got to get tired soon, like you've got to wear yourself out, and they just don't, do they can cry and cry. And Rich, just, I remember him saying, like, what is going on, like what's wrong with her?
Yeah, and you start thinking, how long do I have to deal with this? This is very hard work. This is not what I was told. I was not told motherhood was going to be like this, you know. And it does, especially, I don't know about you, but I with my first child, Cameo, he was a really good baby. We didn't really have much crying from him at all, and then all of a sudden this crying came out of nowhere, and I felt like it was quite hard to deal with, because, you know, on top of the colic, you also have, like you said, the crying and the worrying about how your baby actually feels.
Yeah, definitely. And did you find as well that you were like seeing your friends who you went to all the classes with when you were pregnant, and they were having babies around the same time as you, and you were thinking, well, they're not doing that, so what's going on? And you would kind of go to your coffee dates and you'd be like, well, do your babies cry in the evenings for extended periods of that? Like, it felt really odd. It just kind of sometimes felt like it was just me going through it. You start researching everything as well. Like, I remember being like, right, this blog said this, so we'll try that tonight. And this blog said that, so we'll try that tonight. And I read online that you could do this, so we'll try that tonight. And I was trying not to get too caught up in like trying to find a magic fix, but more just how we can all get through this. But I did, you know, you do try lots of different things and try lots of different techniques, but I knew, you know, just to try and stay calm as well. Like, that for me was the biggest one, was to try and stay calm and just concentrate, like you say, on the baby, because you do worry that they're going through something horrible, and it is really stressful.
So when you kind of clicked on, I guess, from your research and from your mother's instinct, I suppose, as well, that your little one had colic for the first time, so you did your research. How did you manage to help your little one? Was there anything that you did when you realised that they had colic to kind of help, I guess, what they were going through, and to help ease those colicky symptoms?
Yes, so we did a few things. We got quite a good routine in the end. So throughout the day, I would give her Colief drops. So I was breastfeeding at the time, so I would just express a tiny bit in the morning, and then I would give her that throughout the day. That really helped. And then another thing that I found really helped was from about 3 o'clock, so 3 hours before I knew she was going to start getting upset, was to kind of wind her down a little bit and not do anything overly stressful in the evening. So obviously I know, especially if you've got a toddler as well as a baby, from 3 o'clock it's quite like a boisterous time, and the toddler's getting upset because I want dinner, and I had to try and make sure that it was quite a calm atmosphere. And I found that the calmer it was before the colic period, the easier her colic was in the evenings. I found that if it was like, it was almost like the more stressed she got, the worse the crying got. And also in the evenings, I would sit in the living room with her, and I would have the lights out, and I would put the telly on for me, and I would put like just a really easy thing to watch on, and I would put the subtitles on so I could read it and kind of follow along, and I'd turn the sound off. And I found that the less stimulating the environment was, the easier that it kind of got. It took a couple of days to realise that, but the less going on, the more she seemed to calm down. Like, it was still a lot of crying, but it was less distressing, if that makes sense. Like, it was just kind of more of like a whingy cry as opposed to the screaming cry that colic can bring out. And I just found that if I had like a really comfortable onesie on her, I made sure that there were no labels. Lots of people recommend swaddling and popping them in a baby sling as well, but I didn't find that it helped to constrain her. Like, I know that it really does help in lots of different environments, but for us, like, the more I kind of kept her arms in, the worse she seemed to get. She seemed to do well by moving her arms about and moving her legs about. But I found the less stimulating the environment was, the quicker she calmed down.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because I read about, if I think it's in any situation, the best way to help calm your baby down is to find a real soothing approach, and whatever that soothing approach is, because obviously some babies get soothed by the white noise sounds and like the Hoover or the hairdryer. So
yeah,
it's like finding what works for your baby, isn't it? For your individual baby, which can be a bit of trial and error. So with my little one, when he had colicky symptoms, my husband swears that he was the one that could soothe him. Even now, I had a conversation with him yesterday, and he reminded me, he won't let it go, he reminded me of it was like a burping technique, because we found really spending some extra time burping Cameo made a huge difference. And Chino, my husband, he used, I can't remember what it was called, but it was something like the lazy tiger or the sleeping tiger, or some kind of winding position like that. Have you heard of that before, where they like put the baby on you put the rest of the baby on your arm, and you kind of swing it very slightly, but they're on their belly, so it helps get the wind up?
Yes, I did remember that one.
Oh, I'm glad I'm not alone. My husband would be very happy. He'll be like, I told you it was a thing, I didn't just make it up.
Yeah, that's a real thing, yeah.
So we found that really kind of getting at, because I've never been very good at burping the babies. I think I'm a little bit too delicate, and, rubbing their back is fine. But, sometimes you see parents kind of really getting that wind out. And I struggled with that, where my husband was like, no, it helps them, and they feel so much better afterwards. So that was one thing that really worked for us when we started getting, it didn't stop the crying, but it will always seemed a little bit less if we'd really done a little bit more burping throughout the day.
Yeah, I think husbands are like, Rich was the same actually. I think they are meant to be like notoriously good burpers, because I wasn't very good at either. With both of them, I remember being like, well, how do you do it? I don't understand, because I can't get anything up. So maybe we are just a bit too gentle with them.
Maybe it might be, because I have to say, even with my second one, I kind of was like, you know what, I'm not even going to bother. Every time I've done the feed, there you go, you crack on and you burp him, because you are actually the expert. I give up now. I'm not even going to fight it anymore. Like, you win. But also, that's quite nice, isn't it? And I know it sounds a bit weird, but I guess when you're going through these difficult things or these little milestones, your partner, or if you've got family members or friends, they can help. Even though your baby might be crying, there are little things they can do to help, can't they? And build a bond too, even though the baby might be a bit upset. Those soothing moments, or those moments of burping, people can step in and help, can't they?
Yeah, and I really recommend that you get as much support as you can. Me and Rich had like a good routine where I would go in the living room and like make it as dark as possible and have my little place. And I at one point we got a gym ball as well. And you saying about white noise reminded me as well. I used to shush in Ellen's ear really loudly. I used to like, I don't want to do it on the podcast because it's just going to sound awful, but I used to do like a really loud shushing noise in her ear because I read that helped, and that still helps both my children now if they're both having like a little moment where they're upset and they need a cuddle. Like if I just shush at them, it sounds horrible, like it sounds like I'm shushing them, but they both seem to really respond well to calming down. Like it's like emulating your own white noise, isn't it? So I used to go in the living room with her, and then Rich would do like all of the practical, like we both come into our own with our children. Like he's very practical and responds very well with that kind of stuff, whilst I'm very like good with the emotional side of things. So he would like come home from work, make sure that there was dinner, like a good healthy dinner, because obviously you're still postpartum as well during colic, so that's something you've got to think about too, and how hard that is, as well as colic being on top of that. So he'd make sure there was a good healthy dinner. He would do all of the housework so that it was fine for the next day. He would take Rory and put him to bed, and that was like a real switch of roles as well, because I used to always do Rory's bedtime, and then I would kind of deal with Ellen, and then he would give me like a half an hour interval to like go and do a toilet break and just go in the other room and just shut the door for a minute, and he would take hold of her. So I couldn't have done it without him in that sense as well. Like even though I was more of like the baby holder and the baby cradler, because she did seem to settle more with me, I couldn't have done it without him dealing with like the other side of motherhood and getting like ready for the next day. Otherwise that would have been another thing to think about. Like once she finally stopped crying at 9 o'clock, I couldn't have then had to tidy up the house and get everything ready for obviously having a toddler the next thing, and bags packed and things like that. So yeah, definitely get support. And if you've got other friends who have gone through it, I highly recommend leaning on them in whatever way you can, and maybe getting your mum round to help hold the baby, or just so you can do whatever you need to do really.
Colief Infant Drops is a tried and trusted natural brand for babies with colic caused by temporary lactose intolerance. Colief Infant Drops are widely available in pharmacy and grocery outlets, as well as online at colief.com. Yeah, I'd say there's definitely never any shame in asking for help. And like you said, a good point that you raised is that colic usually happens really early on, doesn't it? So
yeah.
Within the kind of first few months. And how old were your little ones when they first started getting the signs of colic?
They were both about, I was trying to check the other day with Ellen, because we had family down when it first started, which again was really helpful. It was Easter weekend, so because she started earlier in the evenings at first, so our family would take her, and I would still be able to deal with Rory because he was only 16 months old at the time, so he was still really young. But I think she was about 3 or 4 weeks old, maybe closer to, it was between 3 and 6 weeks, and Rory was the same, about 3-4 weeks old. Because I remember both of them saying like they're angels until they're about 3 weeks old for both of mine. And I remember thinking, oh, you do cry then.
Yeah, exactly the same here. Mine, like I said before, with my little one, he didn't really cry. And then all of a sudden, I would say it was about 7 or 8 weeks in, like around the 2-month mark, we was the same. We were like, oh, he does have a voice.
Yeah.
It is very early, you are still postpartum, you're just getting to grips with motherhood, with this new baby. So if you need help, or people are offering to help you, then take it. I think sometimes you feel if your baby's really crying and is a little bit distressed, it's almost like you don't want people to see that. You almost want everyone to think you've got it covered, and this is fine. He's not usually like this. He's usually a great baby. Where actually, babies do cry and they do get colic, and it's okay to ask for help.
Yeah, and lots of people would have gone through it. So I remember my mother-in-law was staying with us. She was like, look, I know what to do. Like, I've got 3 kids. I know, I know how to soothe babies. I'm thinking, okay, yeah, like maybe you've got some different techniques that I've got. And, sometimes just a change in person for a baby can be nice for them, can't it? Because they sway differently and they soothe differently. So sometimes that helps. And I always found it hard to ask for help, and it was when my dad's girlfriend actually once, this was not colic related, but we were also very busy a couple of years later, and I remember her saying to me, I want to help you. And that for me was like a big eye-opener, that people actually, they really do want to help, and you're doing them like a favour, not a favour, that's not the right word, but you're making them feel good by accepting help. Like if I had a friend who was struggling with something, I would really want to be there for her, and I would really want to help her, and it would mean something to me to be able to do that. Like I wouldn't feel happy knowing that she was sat going through that, potentially by herself, when there's something that I could do to help her. So if somebody is offering you help, then don't feel like you're putting them out, because they, the chances are that they really do want to help you and support you because they love you.
Exactly. And don't forget, you can, because you'll still be getting visits from the health visitor, you'll still have contact numbers for people like that, and you can reach out for help, just like I did when, like I said, I had no idea what colic was, and even reading up about it, it was a bit like, well, does he have that? Am I exaggerating? Is this really what's happening? Because babies don't talk, do they? They can't tell you, Mummy, this is my problem, and they're experts as well, and they can really point you in the right direction. And like I said, that's where I got the tips for kind of the winding, and for getting drops that you can put in milk, which really helps, and things like that. So, there are ways that you can get support. And also another big thing to remember is that colic doesn't last forever. It might feel like it, but it doesn't last forever. Can you remember how long your little ones had colic for?
I think it was, I say only 3 weeks now, because I'm obviously very much out of it, so that doesn't feel like a long period of time, but at the time it felt like a very, very long time. Me saying 3 weeks now, I think it can't have been that short, surely, because it felt like it went on for months, but I think it was only about 3 weeks.
Exactly. So it doesn't go on forever. It might, like you said, it might feel like it at the time, but it doesn't. I think with my first, it was just for a few weeks, but then with Marlo, my second, it actually went on for a little bit longer. I think it went on for, I'd say around the 7 to 8 weeks. But I think that's because we was probably a little bit more relaxed. So instead of kind of leaving it for like a week, I'd say, or 2 weeks, straight away I kind of knew what I felt like I had more experience. I already have one little one. I thought, okay, this might be colic, we can leave it for a little while, because I didn't feel so anxious. I wasn't like, oh my gosh, there's something wrong with him, what do we do? I guess you learn from experience slightly, even though every baby is different. But so it just goes to show colic doesn't last forever. It's just, you have to get yourself through a tough few weeks, and and it does stop. So there is light at the end of the tunnel, but it's just worth, I think, if you're a mum to be or a parent to be, it's just doing a little bit of research now, because like I said, I didn't know anything, but if you can get clued up a little bit on it now, you'll be a little bit more aware of when or if those symptoms start to show.
Yeah, I agree. I think what you were saying as well with the health visitor, I think going out for support like that's really helpful too, because like you say, it almost kind of gives you permission to realise it's not just you. It is something, you're not being silly, you're not being daft, there is something there. And sometimes that permission can make you realise like, oh, okay, like I can relax a little bit now in my mind, because it's not me stressing over nothing, and it's not me like you say, like maybe making things appear bigger in my head because you've got no experience of other babies. And I think sometimes with colic as well, lots of people say, oh, babies cry, and you kind of want to be like, yeah, but not for 3 hours. Like that's a long, like I used to say to my mum, like, oh, she's been crying for a really long time now. And mum would be like, yeah, but they do cry. And I'm like, no, this isn't just you're crying. This is something else. So I think having permission sometimes to realise it's not just you, and you can feel, the way you're feeling, and if you're feeling worried or anxious, then that's fine, that's completely normal. And, I think just having that outer guidance sometimes really helps.
Exactly. And even just to know what colic is, you know, I know we touched on it earlier, but just to kind of have that confirmation, you know, to kind of say, yes, okay, we think this is colic, you know, just to get that second opinion, because like we said, every baby is different. They'll show different symptoms, whether that's a rumbly belly like my one had, and I just thought it was like really, I thought they were just a very windy child, you know, or the crying and things like that. So there's lots of symptoms, and if you get help from a health visitor or a doctor, then at least you know you've got that right advice, you know.
Yes, I agree.
So is there anything, I know we've spoken a lot about kind of what we both did, and I said that I wish I had done a bit more reading before my baby was here, because I didn't know anything about it. Is there anything you'd wish you'd known about colic as a first time mum that you didn't?
Yeah, I think all the advice that we've gone through is really relevant, but I think I wish I'd known, like we said, you're newly postpartum, and I think when you are a new mum, whether it be a first time mum, a second time mum, I think sometimes you feel like this real need to get back to normal and get back to like showing some level of like, I don't know, normalcy, and showing like proving it to yourself and proving it to others. And I think know that if you're in a colicky period, you're still a new mum. Like I said, whether that's a first time new mum or a second time new mum, you know, you're still juggling lots of different hats. So give yourself permission to be really kind to yourself. And I think that's something that I struggled with, is I felt like I needed to be on top of things all the time, whilst, you know, just go very easy on yourself. If it's happening in the evening times, don't try and cook a 3-course dinner at the same time, you know, just buy in a couple of very easy dinners. If it's that, you know, you're trying to juggle putting another child to bed, you know, like loosen up the reins slightly with bedtime routine, and just make your life a lot more simpler in other respects, so that you can deal with, you know, the enormity that is colic, because it does take up your evenings, which, you know, used to be a very relaxing time for people. And I think give yourself permission to do what you need to do to get through it as well. So like for me, it was just watching very easy telly with the subtitles on, and I would sit there with a gym ball sometimes, and I'd sit on the gym ball and bounce with her, like holding her to, you know, otherwise I'd be stood there all evening trying to juggle bouncing and holding, and I'd get really tired. So I think just give yourself permission to be very gentle with yourself and very kind to yourself, you know, and scale back in other ways, because colic is, you know, it's a big task come the evening time. So you don't need to be focusing on trying to clean your whole house and make a big dinner and, you know, have your children bathed and read to every night. You know, if that's, you know, if you have to simplify your routine, then please do so, because it is a big job. And like we said, you are newly postpartum as well, so you've got a lot going on hormonally, and just be very gentle with yourself is my advice.
Yeah, I totally agree. You know, there's so much going on, and for this kind of few weeks or however long of colic, you just need to be kind to yourself. And I'd say exactly the same thing. Just don't feel bad if it means that you get takeaways for a little while, if it means that you rely on other people to pick your toddler up from nursery, or, you know, I do think sometimes as a new parent, you're like, no, you know, it's going to be great. I'm not going to have anything. I'm going to do everything just nice and easy, and it's going to be fine. And even I remember, even when I first gave my little one Colief Drops, and I was like, oh, should I be doing this? You know, it's a bit like, you know, I felt bad that I couldn't just get through these first few months of parenthood without needing help. But we have to remember that's what things are there for. You know, they're there for a reason, for us to rely on those extra bits of help. And I think, like you said, just be kind to yourself. Don't feel, try not to take on too much pressure. And if you need help, definitely ask for it. And like we said, a really big thing to remember, there is light at the end of the tunnel. It doesn't last forever. And before you know it, you'll kind of forget about it. It will be like a difficult couple of weeks, but you will eventually forget about it. And someone will say to you, did your little one have colic? And you'll be like, oh, I'm not sure, can't remember, because it does disappear, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's funny you should say that, because when I told Rich that I was doing this podcast and he was like, oh, what's it about? And I was like, oh, colic. And he was like, do we know about colic? And I was like, yes, we know about colic, Rich. And he's like, oh, I think I must have just blanked out of it. And I had to like remind us, like, do you remember the daughter? She's crying every evening. He's like, oh my, yeah. Like, I was like, how can you not remember that? Yeah, no, I agree. And like we said, like now I'm having to, you know, fine check details to reflect on it, because it does become a very small part of your motherhood journey. And I know at the time it probably feels enormous and you're worried about when you're going to get through it and what is it going to look like on the other side. But, you know, eventually it does become this small blip in the road of you trying to adjust to new motherhood. And it becomes like one of those things, doesn't it?
Exactly. And I know we've covered quite a lot. Is there anything that you think that you think people should really know that we haven't touched on, or any other tips that you think new mums or new parents could really benefit from?
I think, like you say, there are things out there that will help. So there's Colief drops. We've both used them. Those for me were like little miracle drops. They really, really helped with both of them. So especially with Rory, he stopped this like windy gripiness after his feeds after a few weeks with him. And that, again, for me, just took a massive weight off my mind with Rory, because again, he was my first baby too. I was really worried about him after every feed, and I almost got like this, like a little bit of anxiety around feeding him, because I knew like the hour after that he was going to be gripey and uncomfortable, and I'd have to walk him around the house upright and do lots of winding. So I got like worried about taking him out if he had to be fed and stuff like that, because if I wanted to go to a coffee shop or something, I knew that would be quite difficult. So for us, using drops and things like that really, really helped just to take that level away. And then with Ellen, it was just like I say, like just making sure that everything was as calm as possible, which is so easy for me to say now when I can hear myself. And if you're in it, then you'll be like, yeah, okay, stay calm. And it probably sounds like quite difficult advice, but honestly, I think the more going on and the more stressed you get, the harder things are. And obviously you can feel that building up in you, and when it's happening, then you've got a crying baby, and motherhood is very overstimulating. There's a lot of noise going on, there's a lot to remember, there's a lot to think about. So I think try and create a small routine around it. So in the evenings as well, I used to get in like a couple of treats. I'd go to the shop in the daytime and I'd make sure I had, a couple of snacks ready to go for when she was going to be crying, so I didn't have to walk her all through the house crying and wake everybody else up. But I think those two things to me really helped, were just to ease stresses and to be kind.
Exactly. Completely agree. Thank you so much, Georgina, for coming on and sharing your tips and hints with us. I'm sure if I had listened to this when I was pregnant, I would have been in a much better position when those colicky symptoms started. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And before we end today, is there anywhere that we can find you online so we can find out more about you and your little ones?
So I am very active on Instagram. I love Instagram. My handle is at Georgie Beth Clark. I share lots of things around motherhood and like wellness tips and all those kind of things. And then my blog, which again I'm very active on, is georginaclarkblog.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Georgina.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me. Bye.
All right, take care. Bye. This podcast has been made in association with Colief Infant Drops, who have been trusted by mums for more than 20 years.